number 1, the Columbian Exchange. What was the Columbian Exchange? What was the Columbian Exchange? This is going way back to early September, which to me seems like 2 years ago already. This year's been so long. Jessica, go ahead.
Was it the exchange of ideas when between the Eastern and Western worlds? Ideas
Right.
and people and diseases.
Right. The exchange, the biological exchange of people, ideas, diseases, plants, you name it. The biological exchange between the Western Hemisphere and the Eastern Hemisphere that happened after Columbus discovered America. So the Columbian Exchange is the biological exchange between the Western Hemisphere and Eastern Hemisphere that happened after Columbus discovered America. And can you give me something that came from, give me a couple examples of things from the Old World that came to the New World that the Western Hemisphere didn't have but kind of spread to the New World? They can be anything. What would be some examples? Yeah, go ahead, Jenna.
The planting of tobacco?
I think tobacco might be a New World crop. I'd have to look that up. Yeah, that one I'm not sure about. The tobacco thing, I think it might be a New World crop. I don't have it memorized, so I'd have to look that up. Yeah, go ahead.
Peanuts, thank you.
What?
Peanuts.
From being an old, you're saying from being an Old World to New World?
No, from New World to Old World.
Okay, New World to Old World. Yeah, I believe peanuts.
From the Eastern or the Western Hemisphere.
Right, I believe peanuts are from the New World to the Old World. I think some of the basics are, you could say, just as some examples, disease. A lot of the Old World diseases went to the New World. That's part of the Columbian Exchange. A lot of the Old World diseases went to the New World. Horses are an example, like horses and cattle that came from the Old World to the New World. Then from the New World to the Old World, you could do like peanuts. From the New World to the Old World. Potato. Potato is a classic example of going from the New World to the Old World. It's good to have like a couple examples in your mind, but it's that biological exchange that happened after Columbus between the Western and the Eastern Hemispheres. Any questions on that? All right, number 2, the encomienda system. In the Spanish Empire, there was the encomienda system. And what was the encomienda system? What was the encomienda system again? So they had this system in the Spanish Empire. Remember, Spain had control of much of Central and South America eventually. What was the encomienda system? What was that? Anyone remember that from early September? Go ahead, Hannah.
Where Native Americans were given to Christian or Spaniards in exchange for Christianizing them and civilizing them.
Yeah, that Native Americans were assigned to Spanish colonists, and in return, the Spanish colonists so had these Native Americans assigned to them, and in return, the Spanish colonists were supposed to Christianize the natives, educate them, teach them Spanish, Christianize them. So Native Americans were assigned to Spanish colonists in a certain district, and the job of the Spanish colonists was to Christianize and educate them and teach them Spanish, etc. But it really became what? The system really became another name for what? The encomienda system. Yeah, go ahead, Lydia. Yeah, it really became another name for slavery. So it really became, the system really became another name for slavery. There's a lot of abuses of the encomienda system, and they really basically exploited the natives and turned them into slaves through this system. I mean, more than Christianizing and educated them, they made them their slaves, as it turns out. All right, let's go to number 3. If you need extra packets, they're out there. Make sure you put note 20 and not 15, 20 in column 13, and make sure you sign in. And let's go on to St. August, or the Black Legend. What exactly was the Black Legend? Do you have any memory of that one? Number 3, the Black Legend. Go ahead. Cece?
Wasn't it like the idea that all the other European nations had of Spain was bad?
Yes, it's a kind of a Protestant vision that a lot of the Protestant European countries had of Catholic Spain as basically being evil and basically going and just exploiting and killing all these Indians and taking all their stuff. So it was a very kind of negative vision of Catholic Spain as being, rather than really helping things, actually going over to the New World and just destroying and killing people and taking over land and exploiting the Indians. And it was kind of it was really an exaggerated view, an exaggerated negative view of Spain as being almost evil, of going over there and just conquering. And it was held by the Protestants, especially like Protestant England of Catholic Spain. Most notably Protestant England of Catholic Spain, but Protestant countries viewing the Catholic Spain as just in a really bad light. And that kind of connects with the encomienda system, because the encomienda system really exploited natives, and then it led to this kind of overly negative view of Spain, called the Black Legend. Legend because it was exaggerated. It wasn't exactly true. Number 4, St. Augustine, Florida is the first what? St. Augustine, Florida is being famous for being the first what, Jack?
Wasn't it the first official European settlement in the New World?
Right, the first permanent European settlement in North America. Not the New World, but in North America. So the first permanent European settlement in North America. And do you remember why the Spanish built St. Augustine? Why the Spanish, do you remember why? Like what the purpose of establishing St. Augustine was for the Spanish? Do you remember what their purpose of establishing that was? Yeah, Julia?
Wasn't it to protect their trade that they had in the Caribbean?
Right, to basically protect their Caribbean trade and to block French ambitions, because France also had ambitions in Spain, so to block French ambitions and protect their Caribbean sea route. So Unit 1, you may remember, was a really short unit, like super short. We had our test, I think, on September 16th on that one. And it was like 14 pages long, if you remember that well back. So now we're going to go to Unit 2, so these other units are much longer. Jamestown, Virginia was the first what? Becca?
The first English settlement?
Right, the first permanent English settlement in North America. So Jamestown, Virginia was the first permanent English settlement in North America. Why was Jamestown, Virginia established? Like, what was the purpose, or what was the reason why, I should really say, what was the reason why people, what were they, why, the people that were settling in Jamestown, what did they want? What was their goal? Maybe I'll put it that way, Jack?
Wasn't it to make a profit through tobacco?
Right, they wanted to get rich. Not, tobacco comes a few years later, but they wanted to make rich. Remember, they wanted to find gold. Remember the Pocahontas movie, They're Searching for Gold? So they wanted to get rich and get rich quick. And it was established with what paid for the settlement at Jamestown, Virginia, or what funded it? Yeah, Ian?
Was it a joint stock?
Yeah, a joint stock company. So it was funded by a joint stock company where people bought shares and kind of bought shares in the company and got to basically basically invested in the company, and then they hoped to get a profit from the colony. And then John Smith and John Rolfe, you should know the roles of each of those. John Smith's role was what exactly? What did John Smith do that was famous in Jamestown? Yeah, go ahead, Becca.
The one who whipped everybody into shape using mercury, whatever.
Yeah, he's the one who basically instituted military discipline so they'd have enough food to make it through the winter. So John Smith kind of became a leader, and he instituted military discipline so they'd have enough food for the winter. He's the one who said, "He who shall not work shall not eat." He who shall not work shall not eat. He even organized the sick in work gangs and said, you've got to work here. So he just basically instituted military discipline so they'd have enough food to make it through the winter. And then John Roof is famous for what exactly? John Roof is famous for what? Go ahead, Jack.
Well, did he make a better type of tobacco that more people like?
Right, he he basically found a newer variety of tobacco that really grew well. A newer variety of tobacco that grew well in Virginia and became the economic salvation of the colony. So kind of a breed of tobacco that had less of a bitter twang and became the economic salvation of the colony. Any questions on that? Maryland from Lord Baltimore. First of all, how is Maryland set up as a colony? It wasn't a joint stock company. Maryland, number 6, was set up as a, go ahead, Jessica.
A proprietorship?
Right, as a proprietorship. So Maryland was set up as a proprietorship where the king basically gives a colony as a gift to a person or group of people who then get to rule the colony as they see fit. So the king gives a colony to a person or group of people that then basically get to rule the colony as they see fit. And Maryland's the first proprietorship. Do you remember what Lord Baltimore's alternative name was? He was also known as... Lord Baltimore was also known as... He was a proprietor of Maryland, Carolyn? Cecilius Calvert, so also known as Cecilius Calvert. And Lord Baltimore had what goal for Maryland? What goal did he have for Maryland? His goal for the colony of Maryland was... Paul, sorry?
Didn't he want it to be a safe haven for Catholics?
Right, he wanted it to be a safe haven for Catholics, a refuge for Catholics. And many Catholics came. Many Catholics did come, but Protestants were the majority. So he wanted it to be a refuge for Catholics. Many Catholics came, but Protestants were the majority. And then number 7, the Act for Religious Toleration, 1649. What was the Act for Religious Toleration? First of all, what are the Act, this is in Maryland, so you can kind of bracket number 6 and 7 together. The Act for Religious Toleration in Maryland, what did it do? What did it say? Yeah, Lydia? Okay, the purpose was to protect the Catholic minority from the Protestant majority. So the purpose of the Act was to protect the Catholic minority from the Protestant majority. They were really afraid that with Catholics a minority that their rights would be restricted by the Protestant majority, so it was to kind of protect the Catholic minority. And then what did the Act for Religious Toleration say? Like, who got freedom of religion under the Act for Religious Toleration? Jessica?
All Christians.
Right, he gave freedom of religion for all Christians. Freedom of religion for all Christians. And it's kind of seen as a step towards freedom of religion because that was a big step just to give freedom of religion for all Christians when you had Christians killing each other in Europe. Number 8, Bacon's Rebellion, William Berkeley and Nathaniel Bacon. William Berkeley was the governor of Virginia, and Nathaniel Bacon was a planter that led the rebellion. Do you remember why? Why don't we start out with what in the height of the rebellion, what did Nathaniel Bacon do in the height of this rebellion? Like, what was this rebellion? What did they do? Let's start out with that. What did they do in the rebellion? Yeah, go ahead, Jack.
Did he get tons of indentured slaves and just burn down tons of crop fields and stuff?
Yeah, he led a group of ex-indentured servants and even some indentured servants and slaves. So it was basically a group of poor people that were really ticked off at the world, mad at the world. It was ex-indentured servants and indentured servants and slaves, a lot of ex-indentured servants. And what did they, you're right, what did they burn down? What place did they burn down in Bacon's Rebellion? Go ahead, Ian.
Was it the White House?
No White House yet, no United States yet. jumping a couple centuries into the future there. That's okay.
Hey, I look forward.
Yeah. Ian looks forward. So we're doing this for the benefit of you guys who are watching on YouTube. He looks forward. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, the capital. So they burned down Jamestown. They burned down Jamestown. They burned down Jamestown, and they also destroyed the plantations of Berkeley's friends. So they burned down Jamestown, and they attacked the plantations of Berkeley's rich friends, and they also went after Indians and took their stuff and killed Indians and took their land. So they burned down Jamestown, they attacked the plantations of Berkeley's rich friends, and they killed Indians, took their stuff, took their land. Why? Why did they rebel? Like, why did they burn down Jamestown? Why did they turn against the governor? Yeah, go ahead, Becca.
Well, they were mad that like William Berkeley had like a monopoly. Was it over like the fur?
Right. They were mad at the governor because he had a monopoly on the fur trade. That was one reason. The governor, Berkeley, had a monopoly on the fur trade with the Indians, and a lot of these ex-indentured servants, and including Bacon, who was a planter, they weren't in on the monopoly. So one reason is Berkeley had his fur trade monopoly and they weren't in on it. And then another reason was, go ahead, Hannah.
Nothing was being done about Native American
Right.
assaults on.
Well, Berkeley wouldn't let Bacon go after the Indians. Bacon and his army just wanted to go after the Indians, and Berkeley really wouldn't let Bacon go after the Indians. So that's why they turned on him. And I'm sorry if you're running out of room. Do you remember why this was significant? Against eventually the rebellion, Bacon died of the poopy disease, you may remember, dysentery. And Bacon's followers were hung afterwards, so the rebels lost. But do you remember what the significance of Bacon's rebellion was, Julia?
People started not to trust the indentured servitude.
Right, it led to a turn to slavery because people could no longer, a lot of the planters said, well, we don't really trust these ex-indentured servants, so we'd rather have slavery. That's where slavery starts to replace indentured servitude, because a lot of the planters were like, we really don't trust these indentured servants because once their 4 to 7 years are up, this is the type of stuff that they do. It also is an example, if you could put down an example of class warfare. I don't know if I taught that earlier this year, but it's really an example, one of the first examples of the poor striking out against the rich, an example of class warfare. You have all these ex-indentured servants going against the rich, Berkeley and his rich friends. Any questions on that page? All right, hope you guys are doing well if you're typing your notes at home. Let's go to number 9. Pilgrims and Plymouth Plantation, William Bradford. First of all, the Pilgrims were what type of Puritans? Number 9, the Pilgrims were what type of Puritans? What type of Puritans were the Pilgrims? Go ahead, Jack.
Separatist Puritans.
They were separatist Puritans. They wanted total separation from the Anglican Church. They wanted nothing to do with the Anglican Church. And before the Pilgrims established Plymouth Plantation, where did they go first? They were being persecuted in England. They hated the Anglican Church, so they left England. But where did they go before they came to America, Cece?
Holland.
Right, they went to Holland, and they lived there several years. So they went to Holland, where they lived several years. But why did they eventually leave Holland? Ian?
Their kids were becoming too Dutch.
Their kids are becoming too Dutch. So they eventually left Holland because their kids were becoming too Dutch, taking on Dutch customs, the Dutchification of their children, and they also felt they were losing their kind of religious identity in Holland. So they came to America. William Bradford, as I said, that's listed there for number 9, was their leader. Number 10 then, when they came to America, what problem did they have regarding where they landed? Yeah, Becca.
They landed too far north.
They landed too far north. They landed north of the boundary of the Virginia Company of London. The Virginia Company of London, the joint stock company sponsoring them, had boundaries. They had also started Jamestown, and they landed north of the boundary or jurisdiction of the Virginia Company of London. That was a problem because they had no legal right to be there. So that was a problem. They had no legal right to be there, so they signed the Mayflower Compact. The reason they signed the Mayflower Compact is they kind of gave themselves a legal right to be there because they had no legal right or legal standing, and some of the non-pilgrims threatened to mutiny and take over the ship and all of that, so they signed this Mayflower Compact. And what did they agree to do in the Mayflower Compact? What did they agree to do in the Mayflower Compact? Yeah, Jessica.
Form a civil body politic?
Right. They said we will form a civil body politic. And so in the Mayflower Compact, they said we will form a civil body politic. And a civil body politic is, what is that? Basically what they were saying is we're going to have a civil body politic is we're going to what? What does that mean? Go ahead, Cece.
Create our own government.
Yeah, we're going to have self-government. So all it means in civil body politic is, hey, we're going to have self-government. Civil body politic, they're going to have their own government. That's the Mayflower Compact. They didn't really, it's not very detailed. They just basically say, look, we're going to have our own self-government. Number 11, Massachusetts Bay Colony and John Winthrop. What type of Puritans settled at Massachusetts Bay Colony? What type of Puritans settled at Massachusetts Bay Colony? Which came in 1630, 10 years later. What type of Puritans settled at Massachusetts Bay Colony? Yep, go ahead, Jeff.
Non-separatist Puritans.
Right, non-separatist Puritans. So non-separatist Puritans that wanted to reform the Anglican Church from within. They did not want to break away from the Anglican Church. They wanted to reform it from within. This is a much bigger settlement than Plymouth Plantation was. Much bigger settlement. And the leader was John Winthrop. And what famous sermon did John Winthrop give, or what famous thing did he say to kind of inspire these non-separatist Puritans? Go ahead, Julia.
City upon a hill.
Yeah, this is where he said, we shall be a city upon a hill. So he has this very utopian vision of this city upon a hill that's going to be a shining example to the Anglican Church to get it to reform, and a shining example of what a godly community is. Do you remember what the name of that sermon was? That's an important document. Yeah, Hannah?
Model of Christian charity.
Right, the name of the sermon was A Model of Christian Charity. A Model of Christian Charity. We're going to be like a city upon a hill. Number 12. I got the wrong year there. Why don't you put 1733? I've got 1732. That's just a typo. It should say 1733. Number 12, Georgia. James Oglethorpe was the leader of Georgia. Why did Great Britain want a colony in Georgia in the 1700s? Go ahead, Olivia.
For a buffer colony to protect from Spanish Florida.
Right, they wanted Georgia to be a buffer colony for protection against Spanish Florida. So they wanted Georgia to be a buffer colony for protection against Spanish Florida. Why did James Oglethorpe want a colony at Georgia? What was he hoping Georgia would become, or why did he want one? Go ahead, Cole.
He said it would be a prison, or not, haven for debtors in England who couldn't pay their debts.
Right, a refuge for bankrupt debtors, so he wanted it to be a refuge for bankrupt debtors. That did not turn out. He didn't have the money to free the debtors from debtors' prison in Europe or England, so he wanted it to be a refuge for bankrupt debtors, but it did not turn out that way. Number 13, what exactly was the Dominion of New England? What exactly was the Dominion of New England? Yeah, go ahead, Jessica.
I believe it's when England and the officials said that there couldn't be any more self-government in New England, and then they sent Sir Edmund Andros in there to enforce it.
Yeah, they basically combined, they got rid of the charter governments of the New England colonies, and they combined all of New England and New Jersey and New York into a super colony, a super giant colony that would be run by Sir Edmund Andros, so the governor. So Dominion of New England is where all of the New England colonies that kind of lost their charter governments, and New Jersey and New York, they were combined into one big super colony known as the Dominion of New England. They were combined into a super colony known as the Dominion of New England. And what type of a ruler was Sir Edmund Andrews over this Dominion of New England? Like, describe the style of leadership he had in the Dominion of New England. Lydia? Yes, he was a brute. He was a dictator. So Sir Edmund Andrews ruled like a dictator. He imprisoned, he taxed and fined Puritans. He imprisoned those who didn't pay the taxes. He really ruled fairly brutally and really tried to restrict the rights of Puritans. So he was very much disliked. Luckily for New England, they did not have to wait long for this Dominion of New England to go away, because number 14, in the Glorious Revolution of 1688, what happened in the Glorious Revolution of 1688? Can you give me like just a brief, what happened? What happened in the Glorious Revolution? Who took over England in the Glorious Revolution? Yeah, Hannah. Right, William and Mary. Protestants, William and Mary, were invited by the leaders of Parliament to take over, and they overthrew the Catholic James II in this bloodless revolution. So Protestants, William and Mary, took over, and Catholic James II fled to France. So Protestants, William and Mary, took over, and Catholic James II fled to France. Let's see. Why did the members of Parliament want James II out of England? Why did they want the Protestants, William and Mary, to take over? What is it that they didn't like about James II, the members of Parliament? They hated the fact he had converted to Catholicism. And then he had his son, and they thought the son would be Catholic too. So they overthrew James II because he had converted to Catholicism and he had a son that was Catholic. In reaction to William and Mary taking over, what happened in the colonies, in the American colonies? Go ahead, CC.
Solitary left.
Yep, what happened in the colonies is the colonies got to return to self-government. So in reaction to William and Mary taking over in the colonies, they got a return to self-government, kind of basically they had this period of salutary neglect that started, where they were allowed to rule themselves. And then remember that what happened to the Dominion of New England when William and Mary took over. What happened to the Dominion of New England? Go ahead, Jessica.
The New Englanders overthrew Andros, and then he tried to escape the city in a dress, but they caught him because of his boots.
Exactly. So the Dominion of New England broke up. The Dominion of New England broke up, and Sir Edmund Andrews was arrested and caught trying to escape in a woman's dress, but his combat boots gave him away, and the Dominion of New England broke up, and again they returned to self-government. So William and Mary take over. That's the Glorious Revolution. Any questions on that? All right, let's go to mercantilism, number 15. Mercantilism. Explain the theory, kind of the economic theory of what mercantilism was, number 15. What was mercantilism? Go ahead, Lydia.
The country buys raw materials really cheap from others and feeding their lives, and then they manufacture the goods and sell it back to the colony at a higher price.
Exactly. The idea of mercantilism is that the colonies would provide the raw materials for the mother country, and they would buy the mother country's finished products. So the colonies would provide raw materials to the mother country, and they would buy the mother country's finished products. The colonies provide raw materials for the mother country, and they buy the mother country's finished products. And another way of saying it is their goal was to make the entire empire self-sufficient, and that's a good way that it would make the empire self-sufficient, so they didn't have to rely on other empires, so it would be a way to make the empire self-sufficient. And then also the idea was the colonies were there for the purpose of benefiting the mother country. The colonies were there to benefit. That was the purpose of the colonies, was to benefit the mother country and make the mother country richer. Purpose was to benefit the mother country, make it richer. And do you remember what they were trying, each empire was trying to get more of what? Under mercantilism, each empire was trying to acquire the most what? Go ahead.
Gold and silver.
Gold and silver, right. Each empire was trying to acquire the most gold and silver. And then, therefore, did they want to maximize exports out of the empire or maximize imports into the empire? Under mercantilism, did they want to have more exports out of the empire or more imports into it? Alyssa?
More exports.
Right. They wanted to have more exports out of the empire because then they'd get more gold and silver. So they wanted more exports out of the empire than imports into it. Any questions on that? So the purpose of the colonies is to make the mother country richer. It's mercantilism. And then the Navigation Acts were kind of England's way of enforcing mercantilism. Even though the theory really hadn't been invented yet, they in a sense were doing this. We look back at it. The Navigation Acts, what is an example of what the Navigation Acts did? Give me one of the, we did like 3 general things the Navigation Acts did in class. Do you remember what one of them was? Yeah, go ahead, Abby.
Didn't like the ships that were transporting the goods have to be made by England or something?
Right, all ships had to be built, they had to be British-owned ships with crews that were at least 50% British. That would include the American colonies, of course. So they had to be British-owned ships with crews that were 50% British, or at least 50% British. Maybe it was 75%. I think it was 75% British. The crews had to be, go to 75%. That I have to look up. I really trust my memory too much. I should probably review some of the stuff. So, 75%, crews had to be 75% British or English, and it had to be British-owned or British-built ships. Yes?
Ships also had to pass through British ports.
Yep. Just put down a number of exports had to go through Great Britain before they could go elsewhere. A number of exports had to go through Great Britain before they could go elsewhere. So a number of exports had to go through Great Britain before they could go elsewhere, where sometimes they were taxed. And then also a lot of imports had to go through Great Britain or another British colony before they could come into the American colony. So a lot of exports had to go through Great Britain before they could go elsewhere, and a lot of imports had to go through Great Britain or a British colony before they could come into the colonies. Any questions on that? And the last thing to remember about this is it did benefit the economy of the colonies because it gave them a guaranteed trading partner. That you would think that this would have, maybe hurt the colonies, but it actually helped the American colonies because it basically said Great Britain would always trade with them. You got to trade mainly with Great Britain, but they had a guaranteed trading partner. Any questions on that? What then, number 17, was salutary neglect? Salutary neglect is a general term meaning what? Salutary neglect? Go ahead, Cole.
So the English government, I guess, agreed to leave the colonies alone.
Yep, basically the idea of salutary neglect is that England would allow the American colonies to govern themselves. There are some exceptions, but generally, before the French and Indian War, England allowed the colonies to govern themselves and did not tightly enforce the Navigation Acts, allowed some smuggling to go on. So England allowed the colonies to govern themselves and did not tightly enforce the Navigation Acts. England allowed the colonies to govern themselves and did not tightly enforce the Navigation Acts. And that's the general policy before the French and Indian War. All right, let's go on to, you guys are doing excellent here, let's go on to the Albany Plan of Union, 1754. What was the purpose of the Albany Plan of Union in 1754? What was the purpose of the Albany Plan? Some of you got wrong in your DBQs, unfortunately. Yeah, Julia, go ahead. Right, to unite the American colonies against the French and the Indians. That was really the long-term purpose. because another war was starting with the French and Indians. They had already had 3 previous wars to kind of unite the colonies against the French and the Indians. Was the long-term purpose. Who came up with the Albany Plan, and what did he draw to get support for it? Becca?
Benjamin Franklin came up with it, and he drew like a snake cut up into different pieces.
Right, Ben
Join
Franklin.
die thing.
Yep, the join or die thing. So Ben Franklin came up with the plan, and he came up with the join or die cartoon to get the colonies to go along with the plan. And then, do you remember why the colonies? So, do you remember why colonies rejected the plan? It never happened. Why did the colonies reject the plan, Julia?
They wanted to keep their power first.
Right, the colonies wanted to keep their power the first, so they didn't want to unite and kind of give up their power the first. So the colonies rejected it. They didn't want to give up their power the first. And do you remember why England rejected the Albany Plan? Do you remember why England rejected the Albany Plan? Yep, go ahead, Jessica.
It gave the colonies too much power.
Yeah, they felt that the Albany Plan would undermine their power and control over the colonies. So they thought the Albany Plan would undermine their control or power over the colonies. All right, let's go on to number 19 then. The French and Indian War was fought mainly between what 2 countries in North America? There's several countries in the war worldwide, but the 7 Years' War, French and Indian War in America was mainly fought between what 2 countries for what reason? What 2 countries were battling against each other in the French and Indian War for what reason? Number 19. Yeah, Cole?
Was it the French and Americans?
French and the British.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the French and the British were battling each other for control of the eastern half of North America, especially that Ohio River Valley. But France and Great Britain were battling for control of the eastern part of North America, especially the Ohio River Valley. It was also a worldwide war called the 7 Years' War. And Great Britain won the war. Great Britain won the war. And because Great Britain won the war, the Treaty of Paris was signed, and we should at least know in the Treaty of Paris of 1763 what happened regarding the French land in North America. From the Treaty of Paris of 1763, what happened regarding French land in North America? Go ahead, Lydia.
They gave up most of their land except for like a few kids.
Yep, France basically gave up their land in North America. So because of this treaty, France gave up most of their land in North America. Except for a couple of Caribbean islands, they basically lost their land. And Great Britain now controlled all the land east or west of what? Great Britain controlled all the land east or west or what? Of what? Excuse me. Great Britain controlled all the land east or west of what boundary? Go ahead.
Was it west of the Appalachian?
East of the Mississippi. So Great Britain had all the territory east of the Mississippi, including Florida for a while. And then what country held the land west of the Mississippi because of this treaty? Great Britain got the land east of the Mississippi. What country held the land west of the Mississippi? Yeah, Ian.
Spain.
Spain. Spain had the land west of the Mississippi. And then what policy did Great Britain end because of the French and Indian War ending? What policy did Great Britain end? Alyssa?
Salutary neglect.
Right. Great Britain ended the policy of salutary neglect because they got into big debt problems and they wanted to control their new empire. So it's after the French and Indian War that the taxes start and the restrictions start. Especially they get into debt because of the French and Indian War. What was the Proclamation of 1763, number 20? What did the Proclamation of 1763 state? The Proclamation of 1763. Go ahead, Abby.
That the colonists couldn't go like past this line and like.
And the line was through what?
The Appalachian Mountains.
The Appalachian Mountains. So basically drew a line through the Appalachian Mountains, and it said the colonists could not go west of the line. The colonists could not go west of the Appalachian Mountains. So basically said, after the French and Indian War, the colonists cannot go west of the mountains. Do you remember why Great Britain felt compelled to come up with this proclamation line? Jessica?
There were a lot of like Indian attacks.
Yeah, there was a big Indian rebellion called Pontiac's Rebellion because they were really upset at the colonists coming and taking their land. So they did it to prevent another big Indian rebellion, because Pontiac's Rebellion had just happened, where the Indians revolted because whites were coming on their land. So they wanted to kind of win over the Indians. That was the main reason. Number 21, the Stamp Act. What was taxed by the Stamp Act? What was taxed by the Stamp Act? Go ahead, Nick.
Legal documents.
Right, legal documents were taxed by the Stamp Act, printed documents. Any kind of printed legal document, or even a printed non-legal document, like playing cards and newspapers were. So printed documents were taxed. And the money was going to go for what purpose of the Stamp Act? Go ahead, Alyssa.
Was it to pay for the troops?
Yep, not only to pay for the debt from the war, but especially to pay for the 10,000 troops in the colonies. So the money would pay for the 10,000 troops in the colonies. And the colonies resisted the Stamp Act in two major ways. Do you remember one of the major ways that the colonies resisted the Stamp Act? What is one major way that the colonies resisted the Stamp Act? Go ahead.
The boycott?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yep, a boycott. So they had non-importation, non-consumption, a boycott. They did a boycott to resist the Stamp Act. And what is another reason? Or another way that they resisted it? They intimidated who? Who did they intimidate? Go ahead, Ian.
The tax collectors.
Right, they intimidated the stamp basically the tax collectors or the stamp tax agents. Remember, by hanging them in effigy or destroying their property or just, doing mean things. They intimidated the stamp distributors into resigning. And finally, the main complaint of the colonists against the Stamp Act was what, number 21? The main complaint of the colonists against the Stamp Act was that it was, Abby? They said that this was wrong because it was. Go ahead, Jessica.
For revenue? Oh, never mind.
Matt?
Taxation without representation.
Right, their main complaint, it was taxation without representation. We're not represented in Parliament. And Parliament's counter to that was virtual representation. And what did virtual representation mean? So the colonists said, hey, this is taxation without representation. Great Britain turned around and said, no, wait a minute, there's virtual representation. What was virtual representation? Yeah, go ahead, Abby.
That the people who were in British represented the whole people.
Right, that Parliament represented everyone in the empire. They thought of the good and represented everyone in the empire, even those people that didn't get to vote for members of Parliament. So the colonists never bought into it, but Great Britain said, look, the members of Parliament represent everyone in the empire. They think of the good of everyone, even those people that don't get to vote for members of Parliament. Number 22, when the Stamp Act was repealed in 1766, so the boycott worked and the Stamp Act was repealed, Great Britain put into place the Declaratory Act. What did the Declaratory Act of 1766 say? The Declaratory Act. What did the Declaratory Act of 1766 do? Yep, go ahead, Becca.
Didn't it just say that Great Britain had complete control of the colonies?
Yep, it basically, the key words are Great Britain, the Parliament asserted their authority to legislate for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. In the Declaratory Act, Parliament asserted the right to legislate for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. Basically, Parliament could make any law that they wanted to. They basically said, we can legislate for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. We can make any law that we want to for the colonies. I hope you guys who are doing this at home are hanging in there. We've just got about 5 more minutes to go. And we're going to go with the Townsend Duties of 1767, number 23. What did the Townsend Duties tax? Do you remember what the Townsend Duties taxed? Yeah, Becca.
Wasn't it like simple things like paper and coffee and...
Lead, glass, paint, paper, and tea. 5 import tax: lead, glass, paint, paper, and tea. Lead, glass, paint, paper, and tea. So lead, glass, paint, paper, and tea. And they were going to use the money from the Townsend duties to do for what new purpose? Like glass, paint, paper, and tea. They were going to use the money from these Townsend duties for what new purpose? Not just to pay for the troops, not just to pay for the debt, but, go ahead, Jack.
Raise revenue.
To raise revenue. Well, all of these would raise revenue, but raise revenue for what new purpose? To pay for the royal official salaries and take away the power of the purse. So they were going to actually use some of the money to pay for the royal official salaries, taking away the power of the purse. What's the main way the colonists resisted the Townsend duties? What's the major way that the colonists resisted the Townsend duties? Go ahead, Becca. Non-importation, non-consumption, a boycott. Just like the Stamp Act, they try to boycott, very effective. Any questions on that? All right, so we're going to move on to number 24, the Tea Act, 1773. What was the purpose of the Tea Act? Great Britain came up with the Tea Act in order to do what? Great Britain came up with the Tea Act in order to do what, Lydia? Right, to save the British East India Company from bankruptcy. This was, it's one of those, just like GM was recently in America, too big to fail. The British East India Company was almost bankrupt, and they were one of the most important British companies. And they basically did this to save the British East India Company from bankruptcy. And what did it do concerning the price of the British tea? What did the Tea Act do concerning the price of British East India Company tea? Jack?
It actually lowered the price so they would buy British.
Right. It lowered the price below all smuggled competition. So it lowered the price of the British East India Company tea below all smuggled competition. So lowered the price of British East India Company tea below all smuggled competition. However, why did the colonies still not like it? If it lowered the cost of their probably the most popular beverage of the day, tea, why were they upset with it if it actually lowered the cost of their tea? Cole?
Well, they saw it as Parliament's way of kind of sneaking in their tariffs without their permission.
Right, basically there's still a tax on the tea. So they were mad because they thought they were being tricked into paying the tax, and they weren't represented, and they believed in taxation while representation. But by making their tea cheaper, there's still a tax on the tea, and they thought they were being tricked into paying that tax. So what did they do in the Boston Tea Party of 1773? What did they do in the Boston Tea Party of 1773? What did they do in the Boston Tea Party? Yeah, Abby?
They dumped a bunch of tea into the harbor.
Right, they dumped a bunch of tea into the over 300 chests of tea into Boston Harbor, basically to protest the Tea Act before the tea could be unloaded. They dumped well over 300 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. Just got 3 more points here. Like I said, you guys have been absolutely awesome. I mean, it requires a lot of dedication to be here. I really appreciate the time you're putting into it. It will pay off. You've got to believe, hey, this will pay off in the long run. The Intolerable Acts and the Coercive Acts, number 25. What was the purpose of the Intolerable or Coercive Acts? What was the purpose of these? Go ahead. Nick, go ahead.
To punish the colonies for the Boston Tea Party.
Right, the purpose was to punish the colonies for the Boston Tea Party. Massachusetts, actually, specifically, to punish Massachusetts for the Boston Tea Party. And you remember the main way they punished Massachusetts for the Boston Tea Party? The main Intolerable Act that we learned? Lisa?
Didn't they close up that Boston port?
Right, they closed Boston Harbor till the tea was paid for. So they closed Boston Harbor until the tea was paid for. And then so they punished Massachusetts for the Boston Tea Party. They closed Boston Harbor till the tea was paid for. What's the main significance of the Intolerable Acts? The Intolerable Acts are important because their main significance is what? Go ahead, Olivia.
It increased the unity of the colonies because if Britain could do it to Massachusetts, they could do it to anyone.
Excellent, right. It helped unite the colonies. The colonies were so shocked at how Massachusetts was being punished that it helped unite the colonies in opposition to British policy. The Intolerable Acts, more than anything, really helped unite the colonies against British policy. Number 26, what was the purpose of Thomas Paine's Common Sense? Lydia?
It helps the Iraqis survive because never had the smaller heavenly body controls.
Right, or the significance of Thomas Paine's common sense is it convinced the colonies and the colonial leaders to declare independence. It basically got the American leaders over the hump of, we're going to declare independence. So it convinced American leaders to declare independence. And there are 4 very convincing arguments that we learned about in class. One of them Lydia just said. You should know the 4 arguments. That nowhere in the universe did the smaller heavenly body control a larger one. So nowhere in the universe did the smaller heavenly body control a larger one. What was another one, Alyssa?
Britain wasn't the mother country, all of Europe was.
Right. Britain wasn't the mother country of America. All of Europe was like a mother to America. So Great Britain wasn't the mother country of America. All of Europe was like a mother to America. Tanner.
America had no need for Britain.
Right. America had no economic need for Great Britain. So America had no economic need for Great Britain. And then the last one, and almost probably the most important of the 4 arguments that we learned, Becca?
That the king was a royal brute.
Right, and that monarchy was a dangerous, the colonists had no reason to be loyal to the king because monarchy, having a king, was dangerous to liberty. The institution of monarchy was dangerous to liberty. And that King George III was a royal brute. So the institution of monarchy was dangerous to liberty, and King George III was a royal brute. And then our last point for this morning, and again, you guys have been great, is egalitarianism and effects on blacks and women, Republican motherhood. First of all, egalitarianism was a big social movement in society. What was egalitarianism? What did that mean again? Go ahead, Cole.
Equal opportunities for all.
Yeah, basically a social movement towards equality, especially in this case, treating people more equally. Within American society, because of the ideals of the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal, people started treating each other more equally. People started treating each other more equally. Do you remember some examples of that? What were some examples of people, like the upper class treating the lower class more equally, or the lower class demanding to be treated? Go ahead, Becca.
Like the lower class wanted to be called Mr. and Miss.
Right, the lower class wanted to be called Mr. and Mrs. The lower class wanted to be called Mr. and Mrs. because the lower class wanted to be known as Mr. and Mrs. So you would be called by the same titles as everyone else. And then anything else, Jessica?
They were like bosses instead of masters.
Right. People called their employer their employer their boss instead of master. So employers were called boss instead of master. Yep. Go ahead, Julia.
The upper class dropped their fancy titles.
Upper class dropped their fancy titles. Absolutely. Upper class also wore homespun clothing. So upper class kind of wore homespun clothing. And then the big effect on blacks is what ends in the North? What ends in the North because of the Revolution? What major thing ends in the North, or starts to end gradually in the North? You want to remember this during the Revolution. Yeah, Becca? Slavery, right. So slavery begins to end during the Revolution. You see the northern states gradually abolish slavery. So northern states gradually get rid of slavery starting during the Revolutionary time period. And then finally, the big thing for women was a new role called Republican motherhood. And what was Republican motherhood exactly? What was Republican motherhood? Yeah, Jessica?
To raise their kids with the ideals of the Revolution.
Right. The idea of Republican motherhood was to raise their duty of mothers was to raise their sons and daughters with the ideals of the Revolution, to become educated in the ideals of the Revolution, like liberty and equality and Republican government, and teach their sons and daughters the ideals of the Revolution. And what was opened up to women because of Republican motherhood? What new opportunities were open to women, Cole? Yeah, a lot of educational opportunities. They got more like private academies for women. Private academies, not colleges yet, but kind of like private academies to help teach them so women could become educated.